I am the keeper. I have read 2 tales from the watery depths, the horrors they contain, too imposing for mortal eyes. I'll read them to you now to spare you the torture. A tale of burning fire in the ocean's depths, and another of a monster that creeps along the bogside road. Let's dive in, if you dare. I've always been fascinated by the ocean. It covers most of the earth, yet we still don't know what all lives there. That's why I joined a research project by a company devoted to documenting sea life. My coworkers, Cindy, Lance, and myself, had been assigned to monitor an area in the Atlantic that the company believed was part of the migratory path of basking sharks. Our job consisted of dropping anchor in an area in the Atlantic, then lowering a camera down to observe the area and document any basking sharks passing through. For the last 3 days, we witnessed 12 crabs, 32 fish, and 0 basking sharks. Lance made a remark about how we had the task of watching for the one camera-shy species of fish in the entire ocean. That night, Cindy and I were out on the deck looking at the now blackened seas, when suddenly Lance shouted from the cabin, "Cindy! Madison! Come look at this!" We both ran over to the cabin, and Lance was pointing at the monitor. "Right here!" Save for the light on the camera, everything else was black, except for what looked like a faint light in the distance. "What is that, Lance?" Lance looked at the light again, then back at us. "I don't know. Maybe it's an ROV from another ship." I almost considered it, but remembered this area was exclusive to our company. But we're supposed to be the only research vessel for 30 miles. Could we check the archive footage of the 3 previous days? Maybe we can see when this thing started creeping over the horizon. "Way ahead of you, Madison." Lance went over to our second monitor and began scrubbing through the footage of each day until we got to this morning. "And it started right here." Lance slowed the footage down. That's when the light began to crest over. "And it's been coming this way ever since." The discussion about what to do boiled down to watching the live feed in shifts to watch the light. Because I had suggested it, I was given first watch. I watched the light grow slightly for about an hour. It went from being the size of a dime to a nickel, but I still couldn't make out any new details from it. I tried to stay awake to watch further, but boredom is an effective sleep aid. I woke up to see the light was closer to the camera and larger. Before I could check the time, how long I'd been asleep, that's when I noticed something in the light. It looked like the silhouette of a man, slowly walking in the sand. I ran to get Cindy and Lance. They were dumbfounded when they saw the silhouette. Lance went on about how the man couldn't have stayed down there so long without equipment, and that the water pressure should have killed it. Cindy was more concerned about the glow it was giving off. I looked back at the feed to see that the man had stopped walking, and alerted Lance and Cindy of this. We stared at the screen as the light around the man started to dim. Then he turned his head to look right at our camera. Lance was the first to realize what this meant. "Someone, go to the crane and pull the camera up!" Before we could leave the cabin, Cindy pointed out that the man had stopped looking at the camera and was walking away. A moment of relief turned to terror as the boat suddenly bobbed. It had grabbed the anchor. We all ran over to the stern. Looking over the edge, we saw the same orange light rapidly rising. It was climbing up the anchor chain. Somehow, it could climb much faster than it could walk. Within minutes, the light was only 10 feet away from us. The growing orange light was followed by the water around the chain boiling. Then, as it was out to breach the surface, we stumbled back as the man's head came out of the water, steam coming off of it as the man climbed onto the boat. What stood before us was a 7-foot humanoid figure. He was naked, but had no genitals, and was built like a bodybuilder. His skin resembled the color of burned wood, with lots of cracked, open wounds that had a faint orange glow emanating from them. His eyes were a solid orange, and also gave off a similar glow. We stared at the thing that had just crawled up the anchor chain to our boat. Cindy was the first one to say something to it.
Hello?
The man looked at Cindy. I swear the light inside him got brighter as he replied with a voice that was deep and sounded slightly distorted.
Why were you watching me?
We stared at the man again. It looked like his body kept growing brighter. I tried to keep a neutral tone with my reply. Our apologies. We were out here to observe marine life that migrate in this area.
You come to watch me. I've seen your machine before. A giant black eye that comes down to observe me. Then when I get close, it rises back up before I can catch it. This time, you weren't fast enough. Again, I ask, why are you watching me?
I didn't know how to respond. None of us knew this thing existed, but apparently, the company did. Lance tried to explain.
Look, we didn't even know you were here. Other people have been paid to come to this area, and they were most likely told that this was to observe marine life as well.
The man looked at Lance. Its faint glow had become comparable to a lantern now.
If you did not intend to watch me, then will you surrender your ship to me?
Cindy was the first to object.
Listen, I know you're upset, but we can't just give you our...
Lance cut Cindy off.
We would be glad to. Just give us a minute to get our life raft, and it's all yours.
I couldn't believe what Lance had done, leaving us to die on a life raft, while this thing got to keep our boat and go who knows where with it. Cindy immediately objected.
Lance, we can't just give the ship to him.
Of course we can. Cindy, this poor guy's probably been walking across the ocean floor for a very long time.
Lance walked into the cabin, leaving us with this thing. The glowing never stopped amplifying, but now I could see in the lights on the ship that actual heat was coming off of him as well. I worried that he could have been radioactive. While waiting for Lance, I felt compelled to ask this thing a question. Why were you walking across the ocean floor? The thing tilted its head before responding.
My purpose is to arrive at the new land and destroy it. My only way of getting there is to walk. The boats of wood could not withstand me.
As he continued, I finally noticed the smell of burning wood. I looked down and saw smoke coming out from under his feet.
Where is your associate?
Suddenly, Lance ran out with a harpoon gun.
Right here!
With that, Lance fired a harpoon at the man. It reacted to the projectile with incredible speed. It grabbed the harpoon, its body glowing quickly, changing from orange to yellow, then finally blue. The cracks in its body opened further, as fire started coming out of them. The harpoon was now glowing bright orange, bending and melting in its hand. As it let the molten metal fall to the deck, it looked at Lance with rage.
Humans never learn.
The man moved at a horrifying speed, grabbing Lance by the neck and taking him over to the starboard. The man's fire diminished because it was now enveloping Lance. We watched as he screamed and flailed in agony. I was taken out of my trance by Cindy, suddenly darting past me to get into the cabin. I turned to see if the man had noticed, but he was still burning Lance alive. Cindy came back out, holding a fire extinguisher.
Get to the crane controls. I'll see if I can cool him down.
I didn't question Cindy's suicidal plan. I just ran over to the controls and watched as she ran over to the man who had just finished thoroughly burning Lance to death.
Freeze, you freak!
Cindy proceeded to spray the man with the fire extinguisher, causing him to drop Lance's body into the water. While I moved the crane as fast as I could towards it, Cindy ducked just as the arm of the crane struck the man, sending him into the water. His splash was followed by the area he was in steaming and bubbling. I set the cable on the crane to retract, while Cindy started raising the anchor so it couldn't climb back up. After that, we started up the motor and hauled back to the marina. We were both pretty certain the company wouldn't believe us, even with the video footage and footprints burned onto the floor of the deck. When the time came to talk to our boss, he told us the footage that we had taken was excellent, and that Lance's accidental death was a tragedy. The company had decided that Lance was trying to cook something in the cabin's small kitchen when an unknown defect in the stove created an explosion that set Lance ablaze. He ran out, leaving a trail of burned footprints, and jumped overboard to put himself out. I didn't contest the narrative, and neither did Cindy. It was obvious that the company had dealt with this thing before, and no amount of contesting would make them even partially admit what really happened. Shortly after, we were both let go as the research project was deemed complete. I eventually did get a permanent job with another oceanic research company, and after a year, the nightmare stopped. I still think about the man walking across the ocean floor. I'm not sure where the new land he was referring to actually is, but every time I see news about fires breaking out in coastal towns, a chill runs down my spine. The box was full of tiny, shriveled, decaying bodies. Blank, lifeless eyes staring into space. Skin split and dried, revealing a dark, gooey surface beneath. Some of them still had all of their limbs, if they were the lucky ones. Should I have expected anything more from my old box of fishing bait? If I wasn't running so late, I would have had time to buy some proper lures. But if I hadn't stayed for just one more cup of coffee with my parents, I wouldn't have gotten to my storage unit late, and maybe, if I just left on time to begin with, I wouldn't be late for my best friend's bachelor party. I hadn't been back home in years, and for me, that home is a little town in the middle of nowhere, northeast USA. It is one of those towns that time seems to have missed its march across the world. The air, scenery, and buildings, they all reminded me of life here as a kid. Even looking at my tackle box, covered in Ben 10 stickers, I bought with money from mowing lawns. There was that scratch it got when it fell off the dock the night my friends and I bought a pack of monsters and went fishing. And there, on the lid, was one of those plastic, glow-in-the-dark stars everyone used to have on their ceilings. I laughed looking at it, remembering how I'd stolen from my friend Nick's bedroom and hid it from my parents until I thought the coast was clear. Looking back, they may have let me off, knowing the kind of guy Nick turned out to be. It was stupid, but I stole it because it reminded me of the earrings that woman was wearing on that billboard. That billboard. The memory crept into my mind, or better yet, heaved itself up from the depths of the past. I sat on Route 161, on the way into town. "Who killed me?" was written across it, in bold yellow letters, followed by a name and a number, still lost in the deep. But what I did remember was her face. Her photo must have been from the late 80s, if I were to guess. She was young, mid-20s, around my age. Her face was kind, framed in beach blonde hair, done up in a ponytail, and laid over her shoulder, and hanging clearly from her ear was a gaudy plastic earring in the shape of a star, not unlike the one on my tackle box. I was too young to really grasp the idea of murder as a kid. I remember whenever we would pass that stretch of road, I would always look at the wood line, hoping to see her alive and well, just lost. I remember asking my poor parents if the poster was wrong. I don't remember exactly what they said, but it wasn't the answer I wanted to hear. The memory of it cast a shadow as I loaded the kit into my truck. I could only assume whoever paid for that poster never found their answer. A few years later, someone covered her over with some new advertising. "What are you waiting for?" it said. Probably an ad for real estate or boat sales. A ping from our group chat pulled me back to the present, back to why I was here, for my friend, and to celebrate. It was the man of the hour himself, asking where I was, saying I was one of the last to show. I texted back that I was on my way, before turning over the engine and pulling out of the parking lot. The sky was painted in one of those orange and purple sunsets. Leaves swirled in the air behind my truck, and I took off down the road. It was a back roads kind of evening, and, just my luck, the back roads would take me where I needed to go. I turned off the main paved drive onto Old Bog Road, which dipped down to the flatlands of the valley, and came out by where we'd be staying. The further I drove, the more of the darkness of twilight filled the valley like a rising, murky tide. I turned on my headlights, which beamed out into the growing night. The air cooled, the woods deepened. It was an offness, like waking up as a kid and finding your nightlight off, or, as an adult, falling asleep by wood fire and waking up in the dark. I rolled up my windows as the sun gave way to moonlight. An unease I had of night driving set in. I began looking out for deer, or anything else that might step out from the woodline. When I rounded a turn, the bright red flash of a silver BMW's reflectors grabbed my focus. It was pulled over to the side of the road, lights still on. Driver's side door open. For the moment, I assumed someone stopped to take a leak, though he'd have to be desperate to do that here. Murky wetlands bordered both sides of the road, and the forest opened into a great bog, dotted with clusters of trees and debris, muddy, brown, and ripe in the decay of autumn. The water was flat as glass, reflecting the moon in near perfection, barely disturbed by some movement. I tried to make out what it was. It didn't dash like a fish, but it was too glossy to be any sort of log. I took my eyes from the road, just for a second. A flash of color emerged into my headlights. I swerved, slamming my brakes and skidding down the road. I didn't think I hit something, but I gripped the steering wheel white-knuckled and turned on my hazards. Behind me, about 20 feet back, was a person. I could just make her out as the lights flashed. I got out, stumbling over my words in apologies, but she just waved her arms dismissively, staggering in place. drunk. Clearly, the BMW suddenly made sense. Rich tourists loved getting on benders at the lake house down here. Them and druggies alike. I was equal parts pissed and sympathetic. "Hey!" I shouted. "Look, just stay where you are. I don't want you falling in. Is there someone I can call to pick you up?" She began to stumble her way towards me, getting closer with each hazard blink. "I can give you a lift. You are in no state to drive." She said nothing, but came closer. At this point, I leaned back into my car. Whoever this was, she was drunk at best, and at worst, had someone waiting in the woodline to jump me. I'd have to be late. The cops could deal with this, but I'd wait to make sure she didn't fall in. Looking back to her, she'd stopped, stooped down where the water ran beneath the road in a culvert, fiddling with some rope that went off into the bog, tugging on it and wrapping it around her wrist. When, in between blinks, she was gone. Right after, I heard a splash, and the sound of limbs smacking against water. "Shit!" I shouted, running down where she fell in. I could make her out in the moonlight as my eyes adjusted, the ripples and waves in the water rising like silver threads, one foot sinking into the muck. I reached down, ready to grab her, when I stopped. Something turned in my gut. Above the splashing, the forest, the bog, everything was silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up like pins, and I froze. When I stopped, she stopped. Total silence fell over the bog, and she floated still, face down. Then it started again, but with a single twist of her arm, which snapped backwards on the elbow. Her skin rippled, something squirming beneath. When her knees buckled back on themselves, even her spine writhed like a worm beneath her skin. The water splashed in a great line, all the way out to the bog's center, where I could just catch, for a second, something dark, wrinkled like a great, bloated leech that heaved itself up from the deep. My adrenaline spiked, going pale as a ghost. I ran back to my truck. Behind me, I heard the water splash. Something soaked flopped onto the dirt road, scrambling and kicking up dirt and rocks. I jumped in my truck, slamming the heavy steel door, less than a second before something crashed against the window. In the fading, warm glow of the cabin night, I made out her hand, sinewy and pale, sliding up towards the top of the glass. Her face emerged from the dark, blank, glossy eyes that stared into space, skin dried and split, housing writhing white maggots in its damp pockets. And from the ear she was lucky enough to still have, hung an earring, cracked and sun-faded, but unmistakably in the shape of a star. I nearly punched a hole in the floor beneath the gas pedal, barreling down the road. As she was pulled away, I could hear scraping on glass, ending with the abrupt sound of a dry snap. I got to the cabin a few minutes later, feeling relief as the automatic floodlight filled my cabin with a warm, halogen glow. My heart was still racing. I gathered myself. I could have called the cops, but I know this town. I know our police officer. Whatever was out there, if he went to investigate, he'd go alone. No, I couldn't risk that. Risk whatever that was taking advantage of someone trying to help. And if I told my friends, same story. Nobody travels that road, not unless they're coming here. And at this point, I was the last to arrive. I kept it to myself, for now. Swallowing down all of what happened, we made it a night to remember. Though, all the while, I watched the windows. Every time that light tripped on, I'd step to the window, looking out into the dark. Come morning, my friend and I shot out early for a trip into town to grab some donuts and coffee for the guys, and, thankfully for me, some new fishing lures. Sorry about being late last night, I said, looking out the window into the woodline as I drove.
Seriously, man, don't worry, he replied. Least you're not Nick.
Nick? He was coming?
No, well, he wasn't planning to, not until he messaged me and said he had a new toy to show off. Fancy silver BMW, apparently. My bet was drug money. Never showed, though. Bailed last minute.
I said nothing, but stopped where our road met the one that led into town. There, sunken into the woodline, sat the remains of that billboard. Big chunks of the new ad had peeled away, showing what had been buried for years, now a Frankenstein mix of old and new. The moss-covered billboard read, "What killed me?" I heard my friend open up my tackle box.
What the hell? Good thing we're getting you some new lures,
he said, holding up one to inspect it.
Unless we're going for the dumbest fish in the bog, you're not going to catch anything using old bait.